Please take note that even though this episode is released after the broadcast of The Time of Angels, I did record it before watching The Time of Angels, and as such, no issues involving that episode, or even really the preceding episode, have been discussed in it. It's largely given over to discussion of Torchwood, so enjoy. So news has broken that the United States of America will not be the new home of Torchwood, at least not yet, because while BBC and Fox had been talking about creating a new series of Torchwood together, those talks have fallen through and Fox has decided to pass on a 13-episode season of Torchwood. Now, it is not the usual way of doing things here at the Cloister Room for me to just talk about the news, but I think that there's a bit more to this story than initially meets the eye. So, this week on a rather abbreviated episode of the Cloister Room, I'll be reading between the lines of what's really going on in terms of the American version of Torchwood. So let's go. The Cloister Room, with Tom Dickinson. Episode 012, The Fox Factor. It's the Cloister Room, and welcome to it. I'm your host, Tom Dickinson, 2 Eyes, no E's, and this is going to be a rather short episode of the Cloister Room because I'm only talking about one topic, and that is the American version of Torchwood. Now, the story so far, as you may or may not recall, a few months ago, word began buzzing around the internet that Torchwood would be coming to America because Fox, the Fox Broadcasting Company, not necessarily Fox, the network, had commissioned a pilot script for a United States version of Torchwood that would involve Russell T Davies, Julie Gardner, Jane Tranter, and possibly even John Barrowman. What was not known at the time, and is still not officially known, is whether this series would be an American remake/reboot of Torchwood, or a brand new series of the existing Torchwood that would simply be co-financed between BBC Worldwide and Fox. Now, earlier this week, The Hollywood Reporter broke news that Fox had decided not to pursue a U.S. version of Torchwood. The official comment that they included in their article was, and I quote, BBC Worldwide Productions and the Fox Broadcasting Company have mutually agreed not to progress together with a 13-episode serialized Torchwood format. We are currently in discussion with several interested networks. Now, I know that the initial temptation is to react to this news by saying, well, of course, it's Fox. They burned us on Doctor Who before in 1996, and then they canceled Firefly, and then they canceled Dollhouse. It's what they do. But I don't think that's quite a fair assessment of what's going on here. Fox has always been known as a network that takes chances and produces interesting dramas, but is quick to cancel them if they're not doing well. Now, I don't know if even that reputation is deserved, but that's a topic for another podcast, because I don't think that's the reason they passed on Torchwood. The thing is that there's something a little bit strange in that statement, and it's the mention that they have decided not to progress together with a 13-episode serialized Torchwood format. Now, if you know anything about the way TV shows are commissioned in the United States, you'll realize that that's a rather unusual way of putting it. Now, I will admit that I know little about how this works in the UK, but here in the US, it pretty much always works the same way. First, you start with a pilot script. A pilot script can be written by a writer and shopped out to various networks, or it can be commissioned by a network, as is the case apparently here. Next, that pilot script, if the network likes it, gets turned into a television pilot. A pilot is a single episode, which sometimes forms the first episode of the series and is sometimes thrown out later, but the pilot is sort of it's a test episode created for the purposes of the network deciding whether or not they want to pursue this show. Next, if this pilot episode is successful with the network and they like it and they think they can make money off of it, they will order an additional 12 episodes, or perhaps an additional 13 episodes sometimes, to form the beginning of a first season. Then they will put those 13 episodes on the air, hopefully, and Based on how well those episodes are doing, they may or may not commission another 9 episodes to extend the season to a typical US season order of 22 episodes. And that is, in general, what the life cycle of a US television series is during its first season. It's not that unusual to see variations from this, but the basic formula, particularly with a pilot involved, is pretty much standard. Even when the network is almost 100% sure that they are going to pick up the show, they need to see a pilot first as a sort of formality. The one notable exception to this rule is Dollhouse. Dollhouse was commissioned without a pilot. There is an unaired first episode that is often referred to as the pilot, but actually, Dollhouse was ordered for 13 episodes without ever seeing a single frame of footage. And Dollhouse was certainly not a very big success. In its first year, it was a ratings flop, and for some reason, they commissioned a second year, which was an even bigger ratings flop. To make matters worse, Dollhouse had pretty early issues with what the tone of the series would be and what the identity of the series would eventually form itself into. And I think Fox has looked at these problems and decided that commissioning the show without a pilot was a pretty bad idea. But let's take a look at this Torchwood situation. We know that a pilot script was filmed, and I guess it must have been delivered, but as far as we can tell, no pilot episode was ever filmed. So if that's the case, what you'd expect to hear in the official comment from BBC Worldwide would be that BBC and Fox have decided not to move forward with a Torchwood pilot. But what they say is that they have decided not to move forward with a 13-episode Torchwood season. So it seems that that's what was on the table, moving forward with a season without doing a pilot first. And you know what? It kind of makes sense that that's what BBC would want, if this happens to be a continuation of the existing Torchwood series, an American Series 4, if you will. I mean, if this is a continuation of the UK version of Torchwood, I can understand why BBC would not want to move forward with a single episode of this new series without a guarantee that the rest of it would be made. After all, Fox is really only invested in the success of Torchwood in the US, and BBC would be invested with its success in the UK and around the world. It's sort of like what happened in 1996 with a TV movie, but with a slight difference. The difference is that if a pilot were made of the United States version of Torchwood, that pilot would probably never even make it to air if the series didn't air. So if you're the BBC and you want to continue making Torchwood, then making just a pilot and then we'll see where it goes from there leaves the potential for a dead end, and I can understand why that's not what they would want. But by reading this into it, I think we're picking up on a few other things. If this is the case, and if my baseless speculation is correct, then it would seem that this new version of Torchwood is in fact a continuation of the old version. And moreover, it would seem that the BBC in the UK is not willing to finance Torchwood on their own. This is understandable because, from what I understand, budgets have been slashed across the board. Even Doctor Who has been showing some minor budgetary issues. And I guess they figured that bringing Torchwood to the US would be a good way to get some additional financing to make sure that it was able to maintain a high budget. So as I said, a lot of this is just my speculation, but I think that from this news we have learned a little bit more about what the BBC's expectations are for this American version of Torchwood, and the difficulties that they're going to be running into if they want to commission a 13-episode series without doing a pilot first. So what is next for Torchwood? Apparently they're shopping it out to other networks, but I wonder whether they'll get much more success there. I mean, I don't think any network is going to be willing to commission the series without a pilot. I could be wrong. It could be that they'll look at the UK series and decide that that's a pilot enough. But, I mean, is Torchwood really a good fit for any other network? Fox seems to be the network for sci-fi, despite its reputation for canceling shows before their time. I mean, I guess you could go with CW, but CW has a reputation for shows that appeal mostly to teenage girls, and I think Torchwood, in its British form, would be a bit too edgy for their tastes. And certainly not ABC or NBC. It doesn't seem to me that Torchwood would be a very good fit for them at all. So it looks like they might have to go with cable. And while cable networks might be more willing to commission a 13-episode series without seeing a pilot first, it's also the case that cable budgets tend to be rather lower than network budgets. So if it's money that the BBC's after, then cable might not be willing to offer them as much. But if it's co-financed, maybe we'll never know the difference. In any case, that seems to be what's going on with the US version of Torchwood, and unless they decide to take it back home to the UK and finance it there, it may be quite a while before we end up seeing it. But in any case, those are my thoughts on the issue, and that brings this episode of The Cloister Room to a close. You can find me at thecloisterroom.com or at twitter.com/thecloisterroom, and you can send feedback to feedback@thecloisterroom.com. You can find my text review of the most recent Doctor Who episode at www.behindthesofa.org.uk, and I think that's about it. So until next week, when I will hopefully be giving you a longer and more full episode, this is Tom Dickinson, Two Eyes No E's, signing off.